ime je Branislava Lepotić-Kovačević, za one koji me ne znaju, i ja sam predsjednica Udruženja za pravo energetike Srbije. Dobrodošli na našu današnju konferenciju pod nazivom Pravo energetike, životna sredina i investicije u kontekstu i nakon COVID-19 virusa. Dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and participants, I would like to tell you welcome to Serbian Energy Law Association Conference, Energy Law, Environment and Investments in the Context and After COVID-19 Virus. Nažalost, ove godine niko iz institucija nije mogao da nam se pridruži. Mi smo pozvali ministarku energetike, ona nije uspela zbog okolnosti u kojima se nalazimo, ali u svakom slučaju sa nama je naš dragi prijatelj, gospodin Vicente Lopez Ibor-Major, koji je predsjednik Evropske federacije Udruženja za pravo energetike, koji nam inače već tradicionalno svake godine na našoj konferenciji pruža podršku. Ja ovom prilikom želim da ga pozdravim i on će vam se svima obratiti. Dear Vincent, the floor is yours.
A new legislative framework based on clean energy that is proposed to be transferred to the frameworks of the 27 countries of the European Union in a relatively short period of time, and also and undoubtedly would be extrapolated to another countries and regions of the world, particularly the neighborhood circle of the European Union that you know very well. The elected presidents of the United States also proposed a federal and state Green Deal program, remembering what has happened in the 30s of the last century by President Delano Roosevelt. Recovery, Relief, Reform was the name of that program of New Deal. Now is a Green Deal. A Green Deal program with the standards of great significance for North America energy industry in the coming years. So there are two big transformations during the last 2 decades. From one side, the non-conventional hydrocarbons, let's so-called in America, revolution, with very important implications in the nature of the energy in the United States. And now the revolution coming from the energy clean technologies and the energy services, and also in communities, the so-called decarbonized communities, vulnerable communities, and so on. They are exploring, particularly in the state of California. In other countries, in different parts of the world, China, India, Australia, the Latin region, etc., plans are emerging to comply with climate objectives that will modify the existing energy legal frameworks, little by little, in a process of transition, but in a very clear and determined horizon. Today in the world, there are more than 170 countries that legislate in similar terms. Don't forget Article 2 of the Treaty of Paris, in the framework of the relationship between climate change and energy, and in favor of clean technologies. Naturally, that leads us to an energy transition in which things will not happen immediately, but will mark a process, a path of transformation supported by the digitization. The digitalization process is so important and in convergence with the energy transition of hugely consequences. This will also be completed with efforts in favor of the so-called circular economy, incorporated in the framework of the energy transition. Thus, the movement towards the green economy is fully consistent with the broader movement in favor of the circular economy. Energy law is at the center of all these transformations. First of all, it is a matter of making interpretation that the rules that will be adopted at an have been adopted at an international level are going to be transferred, translated, transposed, or incorporated into our domestic legislation. But it is also about building a new energy law, a global energy law. at the height of these historical circumstances. It's a law connected with the climate dimension and analyzed comprehensively in its entirety, not as a part, not fragmented, nor by subsectors, nor by reserves and technologies isolated in a very comprehensive way. That is the new reality. Law connected with the climate dimension, as I said before, and analyzed comprehensively in its entirety. Naturally, for this, it is necessary to articulate a set of general principles. As Dr. Branislava knows very well, I always put forward this question of general principles. Professor Heffron, who will talk tomorrow, will remember very well how 4 years ago we exchanged in London talking about the future of energy law. And he was saying, oh, it's very important to take into account the new realities of clean energy. And I answered him, absolutely, definitely, that would be very important in all sense, in all the value chain of the energy law, from oil to renewables. But I answered him, but most important than that, for me, is to establish a very important, rigorous, consistent principles of energy law. Exactly the same to what has happened with the environmental protection, as I have the occasion to mention also last year in your beautiful country. Energy law must rise all these challenges. In EFELA, we have been working very intensively. The Serbian Federation knows that very well, because you are also working very intensively in the EFELA circle in coordination with the almost 20 national European associations to gain a better knowledge through the exchanges that we have of this sort of new global energy law. And we have been very close relations with the European institutions. We have meetings with the Court of Justice. In 2 occasions, we have different meetings with the European institutions. We are going to have in the next year, at the beginning of next year again, meetings with the European institutions. Last week, I had the occasion to exchange deeply about energy law objectives and realities with the newly appointed Director General of Legal Services of the European Union, with whom I've been working for some years on the past. So during the pandemic, we have organized different meetings about the COVID-19 and domestic legislation, with a very good cooperation and participation of the Serbian Federation, and exploring all the questions relating to contractual agreements, the social measures, reactions coming from the legal perspective from public administration and commercial commercial operators, and the situation of the vulnerable consumers from the legal perspective, and so on. We have a pending seminar, very important, on state aids and energy law at the European Union. And I have proposed, also within the framework of EFELA, to hold a conference next year on economic regulation and energy law, because both worlds, economy and law, are fully interconnected, increasingly in the new horizon to which we are heading. The Serbian Federation has presented a magnificent program for these 2 days, a program that covers energy, environment, and investment, very important. Don't forget it, taxonomy from the European Union, and the expansion that it would have in terms of rules to do sustainable investments, to take into account this. My congratulations once again to the organizers, to the organization of this fantastic conference, international conference, and in a very special way to the president of the association, my friend, Dr. Branislava Lepotic-Kovacevic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicente, for your nice words. Thank you for your support. As always, is present for us. Hvala gospodine Vicente i hvala na podršci koju nam uvek pružate u organizaciji ovih događaja, kako ličnom podrškom, tako i podrškom članova EFELE koji uvek doprinesu kvalitetu našeg programa. Ja sam razmišljala da govorim nešto više u uvodnoj reči o ovim temama koje nas okružuju, onda sam shvatila da je bolje da te reči ostavim našim učesnicima, našim prezenterima u konferenciji. Ono što sam htela da kažem, da nije nam bilo lako da organizujemo ovu konferenciju, razmišljali smo da li da ili ne. Ovaj virus je i pandemija pogodila ceo svet, a onda samim tim i svakog pojedinca ovde drugačije su mu okolnosti u kojima živi i svakako to odnosi značajno vreme. Ipak mi smo se opredelili da organizujemo konferenciju u ovakvom obliku, da pokažemo da smo živi i smatramo da je uspeh što smo uspeli da se organizujemo. Konferencija će izgledati malo drugačije, trajeće 2 dana, da bi, kako video link je zgodnije pratiti u kraćim vremenskim intervalima. Inače, ova fizička distanca svakako rađa i socijalnu i to je bio razlog da mi ne dozvolimo da virus pogodi sve nas time i da se ipak i ovim putem povežemo učestvujući na ovoj konferenciji. Zbog toga se zahvaljujem svim članovima udruženja koji su pomogli da se ova konferencija organizuje. Svi oni imaju svoje poslove, svi imaju napor da u tome postignu sve što su inače postizali i posebno im hvala. Zahvaljujem se i Efeli na podršci, zahvaljujem se i svima vama učesnicima, jer na taj način pokazujemo da smo povezani i da zaista radimo svoj posao i da gradimo temu kojom se svi zajedno bavimo, o kojoj je Vicente govorio malo pre, veoma detaljno i veoma lepo, koja u stvari pokazuje pravac razvoja prava energetike, jer svakako nove okolnosti nas menjaju i utiču na nas. Mi smo pokušali i kroz ovu konferenciju i vidjet ćemo, očekujemo da to uspemo, znači da prvog dana govorimo o nama samima, o potrošačima energije u ovim novim okolnostima i životnoj sredini u kontekstu i nakon COVID-19 virusa, a sutradan ćemo da govorimo o tome šta se očekuje i kakav treba da bude odgovor investitora i učesnika na tržištu u svemu ovome, šta treba preduzeti da se sve ovo prevaziđe i koliko nas je sve to pogodilo. I u svakom slučaju, ono od čega je pravo energetike pre više decenije počelo, jedna jako bitna i dobra knjiga iz ove oblasti koju je napisao čuveni profesor Thomas Walde, Content, Kontekst i Players, jer je to osnova prava energetike da se prilagođava datim okolnostima. Ova situacija sa COVID-om je jedan vrlo interesantan tekst i mi ćemo kroz ovu konferenciju da pokažemo kako ona utiče na pojedine oblasti prava energetike i samih nas, učesnika u svemu ovome. Zbog toga ne bih prošlo vreme dalje. Otvaram ovu konferenciju i dajem reč moderatorki Ivi Đinđić-Ćosić da počne prvu sekciju pravo energetike, potrošači energije, životna sredina u kontekstu i nakon COVID-19 virusa i da u stvari pokažemo koliko smo aktivni i koliko se snalazimo u svemu ovome. Iva, izvoli.
Hvala, Brano. Thank you, Brano. Dear participants, on 31st December 2019, World Health Organization was informed of cases of pneumonia of unknown cause in Wuhan, in China. Coronavirus was identified as a cause of pneumonia, and authorities of China on 7th January named it COVID-19. By mid-March 2020, European region had become epicenter of the epidemic. COVID-19 reactivates some topics like air pollution problems with bad quality of air, and reactivated unfinished homework for so many countries worldwide. Even 2013, World Health Organization published science-based evidence, some researches of experts that bad quality of air or air pollution makes some huge problems for health. Aware some of the fact that we are facing with a problematic effect also energy sector, time of COVID-19, now we should ask each other, what is the plan? What is the next steps of energy sector? And now we will ask our speakers to talk about that problem. Mr. Dirk Bouchelet, Energy Community Secretariat, Deputy Director and Legal Counsel, please tell us something.
Greetings, can you hear me? Is probably the most common opening now of speeches. We have seen a lot of backgrounds. We've been invited to many living rooms. This is my office here, not my living room. We have seen a certain decrease in office culture as well. You see me very casual here today. And many people have expressed their regret that meetings cannot be held physically anymore. And this I can only repeat in a very heartfelt manner. I deeply regret that we cannot meet in Belgrade these days to enjoy not only an interesting conference, another one in this great series, but also the socializing which keeps us as human beings and also as lawyers together. With this all having been said, of course, 2020 will be remembered for the impact of COVID, but also I believe about something more, and President of EFELA has already alluded to it. It is the year in which the transformation of the energy sectors, and by consequence, I would say also energy law, became manifest. And if you go down one slide, please, then I have prepared a short presentation. Please continue with the presentation, which would look a little bit into what the transformation, the Green Deal as it is called nowadays, does to the energy community, what it does to energy law, but also what it does to our countries. Because once again, 2020 is probably, when looking back in history, the point in time where we reached and we crossed the point of no return, and we have to face all these impacts, not only of COVID, but probably more long-lasting and hopefully more long-lasting of transformation on everything that we have been dealing and that we will be dealing in the future as well. Let's start with the energy community. Let's start here from a Viennese perspective with the next slide, please. The energy community, Serbia is a proud member of, and a founding member, was founded back in the early 2000s, and at that time energy policy in Europe was quite different, and also the focus of the energy community was very different from what it is today under the conditions of the Green Deal. At the time, we had a strong and almost exclusive belief in markets. That was evidently very important for the energy community contracting parties, which just came out of socialist market orders. So sometimes I refer to that as the first transition, which is still not fully accomplished, of energy community countries moving from state-planned energy sectors to market-based energy sectors. And the irony is that with the Green Deal, evidently the influence of the state is coming back, the influence of regulation. And while markets are still an important instrument, they are probably not the main objective as they used to be when we were founded in 2005. And the second difference between then and now is evidently the fact that the energy community is a sectoral community. So it zooms into one sector, energy, which has been identified as being at the cause of climate change to a large degree. So it must also be part of the solution, not only of the problem. And indeed, in Europe, in Western Europe, the energy sector, the decarbonization is already on a very good and quite advanced way in many countries. But also we are of course witnessing and all aware that the energy sector alone is not going to help us reaching decarbonization in 2050. This has to go beyond. And that's another challenge also to a sectoral community as the energy community, how to not get stuck in this straitjacket of dealing with one sector only. Also, the energy community has been based on the principal idea that we are aligning with European energy policy in legal terms by importing what comes from the European Union, the law of the European Union, and that has been exposed to challenges as well over time. I call that the reciprocity challenge, so the fact that indeed we may, through energy community legislation, establish relations between contracting parties, but it is very difficult to establish relations between contracting parties, that is energy community countries and EU member states, due to the very simple fact that those EU member states are not obliged to apply European law also to non-EU countries. And with this, we maybe see an increasing tendency also of a fortress Europe in energy law. I will come back to that. The enforcement challenge is another issue, another aspect of what brought us to a discussion about treaty amendments, namely the fact that implementation in contracting parties in the non-EU countries to adhere to European law is maybe not as quickly and effectively moving on as elsewhere on the continent, and the tools, the instruments of the energy community are not adequate and do not live up to the standards of European law enforcement. Another reason of reforming the energy community treaty. And maybe, and closer to the problem of the Green Deal and decarbonization, is the fact that this original idea that an energy community can function on the basis of just taking over European legislation is becoming more and more complex, as this European legislation is not the nicely packaged energy packages that we used to know. And there was a first package, there was a second package, there was a third package. Now all of a sudden everything is in constant move and in constant flux. Look at the clean energy package. It was just adopted. We have never received it. We have never imported it in the energy community. And it is questionable. Despite there is a commitment, it is questionable how this will be done, because barely adopted, it is already under review. It is already opened again and being amended as a consequence of the climate law and other developments. So this assumption that you have packages that are closed and that are ready to be exported is not working anymore, as the European Union itself has become a legislative laboratory of sorts, and you can almost not point to the right time where something would be ready to also share it with the neighbor countries. But before going back to the challenge for the energy community posed by the Green Deal or decarbonization, I would like to make a few general remarks and excursus, if you like, about the impact of that development of energy law in more general terms. And if you move on with the slide, please, then I would quickly remind us all to the opening up, to the merging, to the coupling of the energy sectors with other sectors as we currently see it. In the EU, this concept was taken over late of European energy law only in the 90s. And irony has it that we started in the European Union in the evolution of European energy law with a so-called Paris Agreement, the establishment of the coal and steel community, which was very much focusing on one energy carrier. And we ended, if I may say so, somehow provocatively as well, we ended the career of energy-only law with another Paris Agreement, the one that we all very well know of 2015 that is at the root of our decarbonization commitment. In between, we have achieved a lot. We have achieved another DNA, an energy law DNA. So all the energy sectors, all the energy systems in all European countries, and that does include the energy communities, that does include countries like Serbia, now follow more or less, but remarkably, to a remarkable great extent, the same DNA. What used to be a patchwork over Europe is now based on principles such as unbundling, third-party access, and you know them all, is now following the same main principles. And if you continue with the next slide, please, then we will see that this has several aspects, and that European energy law, the maybe 20-year-long career of a concept that was focused on one sector alone, brought us remarkably far. We have not only established a DNA based on common principles, but on account of network codes, for example, we have expanded that into a true harmonization of the way how the sector is governed and organized and grids are operated. So the level of harmonization all over Europe is, for 20 years of a European energy law, has really achieved a very high level. And at the same time, the energy transition, decarbonization, the Green Deal, of course, makes us ask questions again. Is this market model that we've been establishing for our energy law, is that as an objective for that law, is that still fit for purpose? You can doubt if you see, and that's only a detail maybe, if you see how much renewables, the rise of renewables have challenged the old ways of dealing with system stability, integrity, what kind of costs that causes. All of this calls probably in Europe for a more profound discussion on where do we want to go with our energy law. On top of this, we have a discussion about the competences. We are in a shared legal order. So in the EU, that's a classic to ask what is my competence, what is the European Union's, and that's in the energy sector evidently always a question of sovereignty. This has been kind of focused in a legal manner in the Lisbon Treaty through an article that says, yes, there is a competence of the EU for energy policy and law, but the so-called energy mix is remains within the competence of the member states. Now, what does it mean, the energy mix, in times of decarbonization? I think that's a very interesting question. And you can ask yourself that question on how much sovereignty actually remains if we all commit to come up with a more or less same energy mix in the future, namely one that is decarbonized and that excludes completely, almost completely, fossil fuels. We have also seen challenges as a consequence of the decarbonization trend through our beloved trilemma, which was meant to cover three angles: the internal market, security of supply, and sustainability. That has been too schematic, as we had to acknowledge, and we needed a more holistic approach. And before we move to that more holistic approach, just as a side note, the last milestone in the 20-year-old career of energy law, of European energy law, and I think this is relevant at our meeting here today, is the external perspective. There has been a great degree of juridification, sometimes even judicialization of energy policy on the external side. And evidently the energy community is an example for that, but also the way how the EU has learned to deal with certain pipeline projects. The question again, and that's the big challenge in front of us, how will the decarbonization objective, how will the Green Deal affect and maybe also put into question these achievements being reached through a European energy law as the big unifier across the continent? Is it going to soften up this, or will we stay with what we have achieved and be able to use the law as a harmonizer even further? Now, please, if you move on to the next slide. That brings us up to speed with the era of the Green Deal. The European energy policy and also European law has indeed been affected by the recent developments in European policy making and also international one, the Paris Agreement I mentioned already. European Union policy making has copied a lot from the Paris Agreement, which itself is a remarkable governance transfer, because it is transferring experiences made in the United Nations system to the system of the European Union, which by tradition and history has been a completely different one. And so instead of hardcore command and control, enforcement functions and roles, you see a new energy policy and by consequence a new energy law, which is building on common targets and national implementation, but also on plans rather than on strict standards and enforcement. This, as I said, has been reflected by the recent policy developments in the European Union. First, we had the Energy Union, you may still remember. That was a very fashionable term only a few years ago. And the Energy Union's biggest achievement probably was to turn the energy sector out of its old straitjacket of network energy and to go more holistic, to prepare what today we call sector coupling and sector integration. But now we're already one step further, and that's the Green Deal, and that of course goes way beyond the energy sector and its relation to neighboring sectors. That is the commitment and the working towards decarbonizing the continent completely. And while these are all very political goals, achieved much more than before with soft law measures, you could ask yourself whether we have more recently seen a renaissance of the law as a tool also for the Green Deal, for implementing the Green Deal. There is a project, a proposal for so-called climate law being discussed in Brussels. But if you look at that more closely, it is probably more something that governs or that covers the governance of how to implement the Green Deal in the European Union than what we would normally associate with the term law. Now let us move to the last slide, please. In this, I would like to draw a conclusion or to maybe take these findings of a European energy law, which has been developing over some 20 years or so, and which has been put into question, challenged maybe by new objectives, and especially by this all-inclusive approach and commitment to achieve full decarbonization. How does that trend reflect on an energy community, which, as I said before, is based on the hardcore belief in European legislation? How does this softening up, this widening up, this broadening up, how does that affect the energy community as such, but also the contracting parties of the energy community, such as Serbia? How does the transition affect their energy law and their energy policies? Well, in the energy community, we had a couple of directives that looked very innocent in the early 2000s, but that turned to be the trigger for decarbonization also in the contracting parties. I'm thinking here of the so-called large combustion plants directive, already forgotten in the European Union, but a directive that puts an exit date on existing coal-fired power plants. And that, of course, when that directive entered into force or was meant to be implemented on 1st January 2018, that made it very clear to everybody in the sector that the end of the energy system as we know it, the end of a carbonized, of a coal-based energy system is within reach. We have also seen a rise in renewables, and with it, of course, new approaches also to not only to award support schemes through auctions, but also challenges somehow to the established actors in the sector. Our energy sectors, that's a fact, and the legacy have been very much state-dominated, not unlike other European countries, but maybe more pronounced in the east and southeast of Europe. And renewable energy investments mostly happen to come from private investments, which is a good thing. And now, of course, with the sector that is expecting to be built increasingly on renewable investments rather than traditional coal and maybe also big hydropower, that's something that also calls into question the position of the established incumbents, the position of the state-owned companies. It is a governance challenge for them as well. It is a challenge of adapting or losing out. And we will see only in the coming years to what extent they are actually capable of adapting. We have some shortcomings also in our policy making in the energy community, if I may call it that way. The EU has targets which guide the way through the towards the decarbonization, especially for 2030. That's what we are still lacking, unfortunately, in the energy community. We hope that we will fill this gap soon, but right now it's already this lack of guidance for the direction and the level of ambition that our energy sector development and energy legislation should take is already feelable. We do have, nevertheless, a start of adapting to European instruments such as the National Energy and Climate Plan. North Macedonia was the first country who has submitted us a National Energy and Climate Plan, which is very ambitious and which is also a very important tool, a project management tool in the first place to get from here to decarbonization. And very often, as is the case in North Macedonia, is linked to a phase out of coal commitment. And when we talk phase out of coal, we immediately look into other pieces of the governance puzzle that we may have or we may not have in the energy community. And maybe the most evident absent instrument in most of our contracting parties is a carbon price. That is something that's been a key driver in the European Union for decarbonization and continues to be so. We are not only missing that, but we may have to face very soon the challenge of a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will be the European response towards the absence of a carbon pricing mechanism and a sizable price to carbon in our contracting parties. We miss other pieces of the puzzle as well. Just transition is something that I could talk about for a long time. I will not. The lack of finance of the dimension that has now, together with COVID recovery measures that we are seeing building up in the European Union, is evidently something we miss as well. What we do see in the energy community also, where we are catching up fast with the European Union developments, however, is that we have new actors on the scene. I mentioned already the importance of private investors, but also civil society, individuals as prosumers. I think that's what we discuss also further on today's conference, are indeed game changers, which hopefully will allow the energy community not only to successfully complete its first energy transition, the one from state-run energy sectors towards a market-based energy governance, but also the second one, the Green Deal, the decarbonization, which is so much more important, but also so much more challenging than what we have been doing so far, and with a certain degree of flexibility, with a certain openness towards adapting our usual approach to practicing energy law, because the energy decarbonization will not leave the law unaffected, as I said before. I think if we are open towards that, energy law can and will play an important role also in the journey of decarbonization. And with that, I would hand back to Eva, and I'm happy to continue the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dirk. Thank you very much. You mentioned network codes. And I will take this opportunity to ask you what's going on with the part of networks connected to market and CACM regulative and electricity balancing network codes, when we could expect energy community to adopt those networks.
Thank you, Eva. That's a very concrete question, but a very pertinent one, evidently. The network codes, and especially the CACM or CACM, as some like to pronounce it, have played a major role and continue to play a major role in the harmonization of the energy law, and especially market coupling in the EU. It is to some extent now taken over and embedded in the clean energy package, in the new electricity regulation. For this, we have a political commitment by the European Union to introduce that in 2021. However, it links to the problem of reciprocity that I have mentioned before. We would have no problem with our legal system, with our governance framework, to establish and to couple markets, let's say between Serbia and North Macedonia, or Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, but that's not the ultimate goal. We have to establish the same regime also on the border with Hungary, on the border with Romania. And for this, we need treaty amendments, which are in the late stage now, and hopefully will be fixed and finalized at the end of this year at our upcoming Ministerial Council. And then I think we will see this all in one package, clean energy package, missing market network codes. But with one small caveat, I mentioned before that energy law is so much in flux also in the European Union that it's difficult to actually pin it down to the right moment to get exported. And I just attended this morning parts of the Florence forum in the EU. The CACM network code or guideline is also under discussion again, under review. So we never know when it actually, or how it will look in its eventual shape, and when is the right moment that we can participate.
Thank you, Dirk. I would also invite our participants to leave, if they have, of course, some questions for our colleagues and the speakers in a chat. And after all presentations, we will open all those questions. Thank you, Dirk. I would now ask our next colleague, our next participant, Mr. David Lockhart, international legal energy law consultant from New Zealand, to join us and to tell us something about the role of prosumers.
Thank you very much, Eva. And good morning to everyone in Europe.
Good morning.
And thank you very much to the Serbian Energy Law Association for inviting me to talk today. It's a great pleasure to be with you. First of all, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. And also, well, in particular, I'd like to thank Branislava for her invitation and for her continued collegiality. Now, I don't have much context for the present policy of Serbia in relation to prosumers, but regarding COVID, I note Vicente's comments about the very serious impacts on our lives of the pandemic. But I see the disruptions as being just, as I was saying, I see the present disruptions as just a pause, really, in the relentless rise of renewable energy and its various uses. Dirk's talk was a very interesting and wide-ranging survey, really, of EU energy and EU energy law. But I note that my talk is on a much narrower topic, so I'll do my best to keep you interested. What I will cover is, firstly, what a prosumer is in the net metering concept, the benefits of allowing prosumption. I'll make some general comments about policies and legislation supporting net metering, and also about Serbia's energy, legal and regulatory framework. I'll also talk about some of the barriers to introducing net metering, the impact of COVID-19, and then lastly, if I have time, some of the key elements of the prosumer model. So this first slide, who and what is a prosumer? A person who both produces electricity and consumes electricity is a prosumer. The term applies in relation to customer-installed small renewable energy systems, particularly rooftop solar panels for electricity needs. The excess power that's produced is that is, the electricity that's not consumed on the premises is sent to the network. And in exchange, the consumer draws energy from the network when its own system is underproducing. It's really an electricity billing mechanism for non-dispatchable energy resources, or it can be seen in this way. It allows consumers who generate their own electricity to use that electricity at another time. I don't quite see the whole slide, but that's no problem. At another time instead of when it's generated. Rooftop solar, which is one of the many transformational technologies that we've seen the rise of in the last couple of decades, is a form of distributed generation. But what we're talking about with prosumers is net metering, which is, sorry, we were still on the previous slide, which is more of an energy efficiency measure or incentive. It allows an electricity consumer to store energy, if you like, in the delivery network. Next slide, please. So the benefits of allowing prosumers to function, or of allowing prosumption, are obvious. It's an attractive, become attractive as the costs of small-scale renewable energy generation have become affordable for small-scale investors. It obviously lowers the costs for electricity consumers. It provides the distribution network with local, cheaper, renewable energy sourced electricity it can deliver to other consumers. It also assists in meeting EU directives and national targets for the introduction of renewable energy sourced electricity. It also alleviates scarce generation capacity and delivery congestion. And it also avoids the need for investment in transmission. Now, recently, some markets have become saturated, is the term that you might hear, as there are concerns about an overabundance of renewable energy injected into networks. But this is an old chestnut that we've heard for many years. It's more about developing tariff and pricing models that fairly allocate costs and yet still enable networks to invest, to expand, and to operate and maintain their assets. And pricing policy is an issue, requiring utilities to buy excess solar energy from prosumers, for instance, at or near retail prices, makes it costly for other consumers. It makes it costly for the utility and therefore its other consumers. The times when prosumers sell to a utility may not coincide precisely with the utility's demand, resulting in some of the energy having less value or offsetting benefits. And also opportunity costs can be incurred when prosumers sell without paying taxes and fees that are paid by typical electricity producers. So it's important to get the price of, or the price paid for excess electricity right. If the utility is required to pay too much, then non-solar customers can end up subsidizing solar prosumers. Next slide, please. Just a few words about policies and legislative frameworks in relation to prosumers. There is no best practice and no standard model applicable across countries that have adopted net metering. There are EU policy guidelines that have recommendations for good practices. And in fact, EU member states are now obligated to adopt regulatory frameworks for prosumers. Policies towards net metering vary widely across the key elements of prosumption. I will mention these later. As new technologies and consequently new or different physical power sector planning and operational modalities have emerged, legislative and contractual frameworks and regulatory models must adapt. Net metering policies enable and foster small-scale private investment in renewable energy. Policy is key. Laws and regulations simply enact and implement policy. It's not meant to be the other way around. Incentives. It's interesting to look at recently announced incentives in California, which has long been the leader of rooftop solar and presumption. The California Building Standards Commission has approved solar installation requirements for all new houses, so it's compulsory. They've streamlined the permitting process for residential rooftop solar systems of less than 10 kilowatts. You can compare some of the incentives that exist in relation to prosumers with, for instance, the feed-in tariff, the old feed-in tariff for utility scale solar, which was used to kickstart these investments, utility scale solar, as I say. These are now, for the most part, gone, replaced by reverse auctions, for instance. In my view, Serbia has a unique opportunity to develop a model that's precisely tailored to its own needs. Thank you. So just a few words on Serbia's existing energy legal regulatory framework and market structure. Serbia's energy sector is bound by EU energy legislation promoting the use of renewable energy sources and encouraging energy efficiency. Serbia has been very successful in incorporating EU energy legislation into its legal framework and has more than partially implemented EU legislative requirements. The energy law of 2014 is comprehensive, and Serbia has a well-developed legal and regulatory framework for large-scale RES developments. But the energy law does not include specific rules enabling net metering, i.e. small-scale developments at the household and SME level. So I would say that the structure and the scope of Serbia's primary energy laws and regulations provide a useful basis for introducing net metering to enable small investors to benefit from investment in renewable energy. Amendments to the energy law, coupled with specific regulations in areas such as metering and connection rules applicable to prosumers, would be sufficient to enable and to foster the entry of prosumers into Serbia's market. There's no need for Serbia to pass a legislative or regulatory instrument dedicated to the introduction of net metering. So, what are the barriers to introducing net metering or presumption? For Serbia, the main difficulties are, firstly, the relatively high capital cost to purchase and install rooftop solar generation system. Secondly, electricity in Serbia is relatively inexpensive. So the question naturally arises, will the savings gained by producing electricity for self-consumption justify the capital cost of the investment? Whether or not the price paid to prosumers for excess electricity supplied to the network will also be sufficient to to justify this cost is another question. And lastly, the categorization of prosumers under Serbia's present law as entrepreneurs imposes significant cost and compliance obligations that may deter consumers from engaging in net metering. A study that I led 3 years ago that looked at the possibility of introducing net metering concluded that the costs may exceed the benefits without the introduction of some sort of assistance or subsidy to prosumers. Just a few words on the impact of COVID-19. Now, I'm talking to you from Auckland, New Zealand, where we were very successful in halting the arrival, if you like, of the pandemic. But so I have a different perspective from people in Europe, and people in the United States, people in the United Kingdom. But we certainly understand the severe impact on people's lives of COVID-19. And here in New Zealand, we've had a very, very different year than we would normally expect. So COVID in relation to energy, let's talk about renewable energy, and in particular advances in net metering and the introduction of prosumers. It has slowed or even halted legislative and regulatory proceedings. And it's had a massive impact on the volume of new solar projects, especially rooftop solar projects. We're well aware of both the supply chain and delivery delays. And for instance, solar panels and smart metering. Construction of network connections has been affected by physical or social distancing rules. Regulators have frozen rate increases. And there are financial strains on consumers and on their governments. For example, less electric cars are being purchased, I understand, because they're more expensive. So this is occurring in what is an inevitable growth industry of the future at a time when consumers can benefit from huge decreases in solar costs. So the sector will boom again. Of that, there is no doubt. So I would advise you to install rooftop solar before the next pandemic. At least you'll be able to supply yourself with electricity for vital needs if things get really bad. The last slide, if I still have time. Thank you. Very quickly, this just looks at some of the key elements of various prosumer models. They have varying characteristics, and I can just run through these quickly. The key elements are the method of metering net energy and calculating balances, and how long balances can be banked. Metering and billing periods, i.e. whether or not these are monthly or annual periods. For instance, monthly net metering would allow a prosumer to use solar energy generated during the day later in the same month, whereas annual allows the use of solar electricity generated in, say, August to be used in December. Quantities of netted energy allowed to be injected into the network, whether there are limits on this. Generally, installations should not be larger than the original size of the prosumer's connection or the quantity of its offtake from the network. Pricing models relating to excess energy. The institutions responsible for administering a net metering system would need to be decided. Taxes and levies, it's a big area. Permitting and licensing requirements in relation to the installation of a small-scale rooftop solar generation facility, and the possibility of other support mechanisms. Some key principles that we decided upon during our study would be that net metering should be as simple as possible, the regulatory model. The regulatory model should enable net metering to be developed without creating additional costs to either prosumers or consumers. Utilize the experience of countries that have successfully introduced or adopted net metering, and ideally that have similar histories and cultures. And lastly, and obviously, comply with EU and EC directives and regulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. I have one question for you. From your knowledge and from your point of view, do you think Serbian energy legislation can be very easily to adapt and enable net metering to be introduced in Serbia without fundamental changes having to be made, of course?
Thank you, Eva, for that question. Yes, I do. I don't believe that Serbia would need to devise a specific piece of legislation to authorize and to enable net metering and the concept of prosumer to enter the market. Your energy law is, as I said, it's very comprehensive, and I mean, it was 3 years ago now when we examined it, but we identified the areas where amendment or supplemental provisions would be needed to the existing energy law. And I don't think it was particularly difficult or would be particularly difficult to achieve this. Some regulations, as ever, would be required to implement the detail, as ever, but those regulations would be drafted to reflect the policy, to meet the requirements of the legislation, and to implement the detailed day-to-day mechanics of net metering. So I hope that, so in summary, I'm saying there's no need for Serbia to pass specific legislation.
Okay, Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask our next speaker, our colleague, not colleague, but because he is engineer, yes, of course, Mr. Sean Green, Volution Group from UK, to join us and to tell us something about energy efficiency and air conditioning.
Thank you, Eva, and thank you, David, as well. That was yeah, very educational. Just going back to a point that David was talking about, which is obviously implications of COVID-19. Now, it is something that worldwide we are all struggling with, and it's something that is very serious. So what I wanted to talk about, bear with me, just move this away. It's just an introduction, brief introduction surrounding the importance of ventilation in the fight against coronavirus. Now, I'm not sure how much you know about ventilation or why effective ventilation is important, but just to help you understand a little bit about why ventilation and effective ventilation is important in buildings such as, you know, domestic buildings such as your home or commercial buildings or office spaces or hospitals. It's because we are, because of lockdowns, I'm not sure exactly the procedures in Serbia at the minute or in different places around the world, but speaking about the UK, we are in a kind of a tiered system where we are being asked to stay home where we can. So we are spending, as you can see, I'm working from home and have been since March. So we're spending, you know, up to 90% of our time indoors now to try and protect each other, protect our communities and protect our nation and the world, and essentially. And because of that, the importance of ventilation has been spoken about a lot by various, you know, governmental bodies, and surrounding the importance of good airflow and how fresh air that is kind of ventilated into homes or office spaces where people are trying to work at a safe distance to reduce infection rates. This fresh air that is put into these buildings actually dilutes the particles of such pathogens or contaminated airs. And as you can read here, it reduces the risk of infection, not just from COVID-19, but from other viruses as well, by over 70%. So to take, obviously we all want life to go back to normal as fast as possible, and to get this under control as fast as possible. Now, having a properly ventilated building to work in or to live in, it helps that, and it will get us back to being able to get back to normal or live with this virus safely as fast as possible, and that is because of the, you know, the reduction of over 70% by being able to introduce this fresh air and extract the contaminated air from, you know, bedrooms, kitchens, care homes, hospitals. And so it is massively important for the ventilation to be not only introduced in these buildings, but for it to be introduced in the correct way. So to have, as I said, and I have said, is to have effective ventilation. Just a little bit about the Volution Group and a bit of background of where I come from professionally. The Volution Group is in quite a few locations, as you can see: UK, Ireland, Central Europe, Nordics. We have a lot of distributors all across the world that are, you know, distributing our products, and with that, you know, they have that technical guidance as well to be able to install these ventilation units or heat recovery units in the correct way, so that the ventilation is not only there, but it is effective as well. Just a few diagrams just so you can understand. In the top left here, we have like a home domestic setting. We have on the right a commercial setting, and at the bottom we have an industrial setting. So it's kind of an example of products that we would introduce into markets to properly ventilate these buildings. So there is a lot that goes into it. There are a lot of options, but all work in different ways to ensure that the air quality in the home is at its best, and air quality in the workplace is at its best. Now, as I said, we're in a lot of locations across the world. Brands that I work with specifically, one is Manrose, which is more of an kind of entry-level brand to the market, and here are a few kind of signature products that are sold from Manrose. So it ranges from bathroom extractor fans, as you can see, to inline fans, to centrifugal fans, continuous running fans, mixed flow fans, plate fans, and then obviously the ducting to connect the fans to extract to the outside air as well. Now, I'll carry on, but I will explain a little bit about the different purposes of these fans in extracting and ventilating properties and buildings, and in what circumstances you would use them. Now, sorry, on this slide, just show you another brand that I work with closely is Ventaxia, which is kind of our signature brand of the group, which is the more high-end brand, which has a wider product offering, and it offers from bathroom, kitchen extraction to whole house heat recovery to industrial heat recovery units. It offers the full package to everyone in the market. As you can see, it offers silent continuous running fans. Now, let me just talk about continuous running fans and the reason for this. Now, this will kind of go hand in hand with the discussions that we've had surrounding energy as well. So continuous running fans are very popular and they are very energy efficient. So they're cost efficient. So installing these, they run continuously, as the name suggests, but at a very low rate of energy. So they will continuously run, and if you need to, they will identify the moisture in the air, contaminants, and they will extract from rooms continuously and allow fresh air, clean air, to come in and dilute the contaminated air. So overall, continuously, it's just running that cycle to allow to allow clean air and to decontaminate the air, if you like. Heat recovery units, as we know, various pathogens thrive in different temperature settings, and so heat recovery units will kind of moderate the temperature within rooms or houses or commercial settings at a continuous rate. Within these units as well are filters, are air filters. So as the air passes through them, there is a kind of a filtration that will happen. So contaminated air will leave and be recycled back in, but because of the filtration system, as it's recycled back in, it comes back in as clean air. But it also regulates, as I said, the temperature within these rooms. So you can have it at an ideal temperature for these pathogens or viruses or bacteria to not kind of thrive in these rooms or settings. A few more kind of options within the Ventaxia range. I'll just skip through these just to kind of talk a little bit more about COVID and effective ventilation and government guidance in the UK. Now, as it reads here, effective ventilation is central to UK government guidance. Now, the UK government has spoken to how essential extraction is and properly ventilated buildings are in this fight against coronavirus, and that is because it has been scientifically proven that effective ventilation reduces the risk of infection. So if you were to try to put it into a visual for you, if you were to imagine working in a room, maybe on a production line, and there is little to no ventilation in there, and you can imagine, you know, the heavy breathing from working hard, the sweat, and if someone was carrying a virus, whether it be COVID-19, whether it be the flu, any type of virus, the air droplets or the droplets from, you know, sweat or moisture in the mouth or saliva from when someone was speaking or coughing or a sneeze would stay in that area and would stay in that room or on that production line. And essentially, without that ventilation, without that effective ventilation, would just stay in and would continue to contaminate everyone within that production line. So if you can imagine having a production line of, say, 50 people in that room, and one person with COVID was to cough, and there is not an effective or sufficient ventilation within that room, that has the risk of contaminating everyone within that production line, which will cause the business to shut, or which would cause, in a home setting, which cause a whole family to fall very, very ill from COVID. Now, with constant or continuous ventilation and effective ventilation, it is reducing that risk, as I said previously, by over 70%. So you are protecting, whether it be employees, family members, friends, customers, you're protecting everyone from potential spread of infection by properly ventilating. And as it says in the second kind of point here, a Deputy Chief Medical Officer confirmed at a COVID-19 briefing this year that ventilation lowers transmission rates for not just COVID-19, but any respiratory virus. And that is because of, you know, the dilution of contaminated air and turning it into that purer air. And he actually said, you know, there's a definite truism across all of the science literature that ventilation is a most critical part of reducing transmission from respiratory viruses. Now, it's sort of, as we would say in the UK, is a no-brainer. If we are wanting to get back to normality, if we're wanting to reduce risk of infection, why would we not properly ventilate our buildings? Because there is science backing up that a properly ventilated building reduces the risk of infection from any respiratory virus. Also, the CIBSE, which is a body that kind of evaluates building regulations in the UK, and, you know, the ventilation within those buildings, especially in new builds, also kind of backed up that point and explained how ventilation can minimize risks of airborne transmission of COVID-19 or coronavirus. It says here is the general advice is to increase the air supply and exhaust ventilation, supplying as much outside air as is reasonably possible to dilute and remove the virus from the air as much as possible. Now, it's very valid, and maybe some of you are thinking, why can we not just open a door? Why can we not just open a window and allow, you know, fresh air to come in and, you know, contaminated air to leave? Now, opening a window or opening a door is not effective, or it's not as effective, because you're heavily relying on pressure within that room to kind of move the contaminated air out, and wind from the outside to bring fresh air in. From my understanding in Serbia, especially, there's little to no wind a lot of the time. So opening a window or door really won't do anything. That contaminated air will remain in that room or that home or that building, which is why there is a massive need for effective ventilation in not just Serbia, not just the UK, but worldwide. Just moving on, so the ASHRA guidelines. So I haven't included everything. So this is quite a big document, but I've put the kind of link to that down below. I'll also after put links to documentation explaining more surrounding ventilation in the chat after this. But I just wanted to highlight this point especially, which reads, because small particles remain airborne for some period of time, the design and operation of HVAC, which is heating, ventilation and air conditioning systems that move air, can affect disease transmission in several ways. And those ways are supplying clean air to susceptible occupants. So this is what I was talking about protecting those within buildings or homes by supplying clean air from outside and diluting contaminated air inside. Containing contaminated air and or exhausting it to the outdoors, as I just said, diluting the air in a space with cleaner air from outdoors or by filtering the air and cleaning air within the room. So as I've spoken about, there are various options, and I'm sure you have various ventilation companies. We also offer advice surrounding ventilation if you were looking to just kind of extract and supply clean air from the outside, if you were looking for that heat recovery, which would allow that filtration of contaminated air, or continuous running, which would continuously dilute air. There's a solution for everyone and for every building and for every home within the industry. So what can we do now immediately to reduce infection rates? It's important to analyze the ventilation within our buildings, within our workspaces and homes. Is it good enough? Do we have working fans? Do we have extraction fans in every room or most rooms? In bathrooms, in kitchens, in bedrooms, in habitated places, in office spaces? Do we have sufficient ventilation? If not, it is a must. It is something that needs to be put into place to reduce the risk of infection of not just COVID-19, but as it is, a worldwide pandemic at the minute, and it's something that we're all struggling with. That is the main focus at the minute, to reduce the infection rates of COVID-19. As I said before, opening windows and doors may allow air to enter. This doesn't mean that the air will circulate and clean. You're relying on that wind from outside and pressures from within to circulate that air, which is not effective at all, which is why we need ventilation within these rooms. Workspaces as well. In the UK, as I said, I'm working from home. I've been working from home since March, and we have effective ventilation within our workspaces, and we are still being urged to work from home. So it is a process, but we need to implement effective ventilation in workspaces so that we can get back to normal, and so our economies can continue to prosper, and to allow other places such as schools as well and hospitals to operate at the most effective way possible especially during this time, to avoid kind of larger outbreaks, which will happen if we are working or remaining in buildings or spaces that are not properly ventilated. Now, that's all from me. I've put my email address here just in case you have any questions. As I said, I will put links to literature in the chat as well, so that you can kind of take a deeper dive into what governing bodies have proven and have stated in various conferences. But I guess the message that I really want to portray is that ventilation is key to beating this virus. Effective ventilated buildings, homes and workspaces especially, are key to beating this virus. In the UK, they're saying, you know, you can go out and you can socialize in groups of 6, but only in an outdoor space. And the reason behind this is because outdoor is fresh air, there's clean air, it's natural ventilation, you know. Indoors is where we need to ventilate. We need that fresh air from outside to be pushed into our buildings, and we need the contaminated air to be extracted out. Now, it's scientifically proven, and I cannot stress how important it is. This is going to save lives, and this is going to be a deciding factor in how long we struggle with COVID-19. But I just want to say thank you for inviting me along to this, and I hope it's been educational for you, as it has for me. I'm listening to other speakers as well. But yeah, thank you, and back to you, Eva.
Yes, thank you, Sean. I would like only to underline your not last, but one of the last sentence. Outside is clean air. Do we have clean air outside, here or in our neighboring countries? Okay, now I will give the floor to our colleague Branislava. Branislava, would you like to join us?
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. I just use this opportunity to have the microphone here and to say something. Thank you, Sean, for your presentation. This is very educational for us. It shows us that this part of legislation, we in Serbia call it technical legislation or regulation, is also part of energy law, and we lawyers, energy lawyers, have to take care about this, because with this we have in our hands whole scene in hand and in our minds, and this shows that energy is multidisciplinary, and all of us have to cooperate to better results. Thank you again, and Eva, please take your.
Thank you, Branislava. Now we have our last speaker for today. May I ask our colleague Mira Todorovic-Simeonides to join us?
Hello.
Hello, Mira. How are you?
Everybody. Nice to meet you and to hear you and to see you again.
So, Mira, you will tell us something about COVID-19 and electromobility.
Yes, I narrowed down a little bit the subject of the presentation, and I hope that to present you something that will be interesting. Basically, what I want to present today is one example how this electromobility works in the times of COVID-19 in Greece. Can we go to the second slide? There is a framework that is established, that is accelerating on the EU level in directives, strategy for low emission mobility, national energy climate plans. Can we go to the next one? Which has been established before the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. It has its certain goals that we are pretty much aware of, like reduction of the emission, increase of RES in renewables in transport, promoting alternative fuels, energy savings and efficiency in transport, innovative technologies, and promoting electromobility, for which we need to develop infrastructure and to reduce costs that are still pretty high. This is the framework and let's say wish list, our goals and aims to which we have been heading before the COVID-19. And can I go to the next slide, please? This progress and implementation of the directives and energy strategy plans have naturally been slowed down due to known circumstances. However, there are some indicators that some new things are going on and have been announced. First, we have seen from quite a lot of countries, including the EU countries, Germany, UK, and some other countries that have announced the ban of fossil fuel vehicles production or sale after certain years, some of them even from 2025 or 30. This is one tendency that happened during the pandemic. And then we have on the other side also the increase in demand for electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid vehicles, e-motorcycles, e-bicycles, e-scooters, which I will tell you a little more how it happened and how it worked in Greece. With the lockdown that we had from March until today, the reaction of the community of people was first, whoever could stayed at home and work from distance. Others tried to avoid public transportation, metro, and so on in order to avoid the COVID infections. Then suddenly, because of the lockdown, the only activity that was permitted to us was some individual sports like jogging and bicycles and similar, which suddenly increased purchase of and demand for bicycles, for instance, and this kind of vehicles, to that extent with the first lockdown in March, that the shops were emptied within a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, Greece does not have infrastructure for bicycles, but we will come to that again. Now, what exciting and new happened during the last months, mainly in August this year, is the new law that on e-mobility, electric mobility, that was passed in August this year, and it is a kind of framework law because it tries to address a lot of issues at the same time. I will very briefly present these issues to see that it is not simple just to import and sell electric cars or electric motorcycles. There are much more issues that you have to address and organize. Can we go to the next one, please? Next slide, please. Oh, no, sorry, previous. So this is the law that was passed in August, and one ministerial decision which helps in implementation, but still there are quite a lot of other issues and more ministerial decisions that we will have to have in the future. One is first issue that I will mention here is the organization of the electric vehicle market. This market means quite a lot of things. From one side, there is a need to organize and establish charging points for all electric vehicles, and the goal is to have one charging point at least for 1,000 inhabitants. For that, there are quite a lot of issues that you should address. This law starts from providing certain incentives to the producers of the electric vehicles for faster issuing of licenses, certain tax incentives. After that, there should be organized space for public charging and also for parking of these vehicles. In regard to the public charging places, the law regulates that within the next 4 months, all the municipalities will provide the list of space they have, which can be disposed for the electric charging. Subsequently, there will be tender procedures for people who wants to be engaged in this kind of operations. Now, many other things should be regulated regarding the electricity charging, and one of it is the supply of electricity for the charging. So the law provides for 2 possibilities: either the agreement with the supplier, and second is to have a joint load representative who would participate in the energy market. Since 1st of November, Greece has energy exchange for now for the electricity that is functioning. So several or more owners, licensed owners of the charging places could have a joint load representative who would directly participate in the electricity market to secure the electricity necessary for the charging points. Then there are the issue of parking place. The idea is wherever it is possible to have free parking places without charging for parking for the electric vehicles that could have some special sticker for this parking. We will see how it will be organized and how it will be implemented. We can go to the next one. To the next slide. The law provides a lot of tax incentives. It is a little bit complex to present it because it depends partly of the construction and or the tax system of each country. But they are important and they can be helping for the decision of somebody to purchase these vehicles. We can go to the next one. Then at the same time, there are, some of them are already existing, but there will be some additional in the future, so-called environmental charges that somebody is paying extra amounts when importing vehicles that are belonging, for instance, to Euro 4 or Euro 5A. As an addition to the customs, some additional charges will be paid in order to prevent and to encourage electric vehicles purchase and use. We can go to the next one. Now, what gained the most publicity are actually subsidies. Greece decided to spend up to 1 million in subsidizing, direct subsidizing part of the purchase price for individuals, legal entities, and taxi drivers if they apply and purchase electric vehicle or motorcycle or even electric bicycle until the end of this year. The amount depends from 15 to 40% of the price. In addition, for electric vehicles, there will be additional subsidy of 1,000 euro for replacement an old one. Plus, for individuals, there will be additional 500 euro for installing, purchasing and installation of the charger at home in buildings. This is only for the individuals. We can see a little bit more detailed on the next slide. More specifically, individuals, for instance, for electric vehicles, they can receive from the state 20% of the cost of the vehicle, up to 30,000 euro, with maximum subvention 6,000 euro, or 15% for the cost from 30 to 50,000 euro, with maximum subvention 6,000 euro. For motorcycles, it is 20, and for bicycles, it is 40%, with maximal subvention of 800 euro. I want to tell you that there was a huge application list for the bicycles. A lot of people were interested in bicycles. Now, regarding the enterprises, there is also the substitute, I'm sorry, for vans, for vehicles, and for motorcycles and bicycles, okay? And there is also for taxi drivers, but for taxi drivers also for plug-in hybrids. We can go to the next slide. Now, the social response, I have already mentioned somehow, it is huge interest, and even the waiting lists for these subventions and for the purchase or motor vehicles, motor bicycles, all of that. I will tell you one interesting story that because of the huge increase in sale, there were some advertisements claiming for almost of any two-wheelers to be in this category, which caused the Ministry of Transport to come forward and to try to explain that this is not, if you have electric motor which can continue driving after you stop pedaling, this is not considered electric bicycle. So only for electric bicycle, you have certain rules, and for electric motorcycle, you have to have the license, you have to apply some other rules. Huge discussions and clarifications needed. Increase in sale was visible even for the first 9 months. I'm speaking for the 9 months which was before the implementation of this law, because this law was enacted in August. The e-vehicles increase was from 0.42% to 14.8% in this year, and the total at the end of the year is expected to be much bigger. There is already waiting list for e-scooters and e-bicycles, and it's not certain that all of them will receive this subsidy, and we will see if there is going to be some continuation of that, depending on the total summary. Can we go to the next one? Now, although this was a big promotion of electric vehicles and e-mobility, numerous previous concerns remain regarding the how environmental friendly electric vehicles and two-wheelers or three-wheelers really are. Since they, if they use hydrocarbons to produce electricity for charging of batteries, this does not help too much with the environment. Again, there is recycling of batteries issues and new technologies that are being developed, but still more or less implementing. The electric vehicles still have a high cost, maybe lower cost of maintenance, with meaning the charging, but the high cost of purchase. And again, maintenance within the meaning of the life of a battery that is up to 8 years still. One of the big concern of the public is the limited driving range, which goes depending sometimes up to 70 kilometers before the new charging, then the charging time, and also specialized mechanics that should be for this, where they are going to be organized, whether they are going to be in the same or separate places. This remains to be seen, although partly addressed by this law. Can we go to the next one? Now, what is going on with this is the first law, this is the framework law, and we have seen that there is a huge interest for that. Its implementation started. The first ministerial decision has been first ministerial, but there are going to be a lot more other. Some of the ideas that should be regulated is regarding the, for instance, at the moment, the pricing of the charging is free, meaning that any owner can decide of the way how this will be charged, but it is planned to have a platform with compared prices that would help in the future the consumers to see and to choose the supplier. There should probably be some amendments of the traffic code because of all these new vehicles that we will have on the road, and huge infrastructure requirements, amendments of the spatial planning laws and regulations. A lot of things will be changed in the future because particularly if this tendency continues to this amount. That would be all from my side, unless you have some questions.
Thank you, Mira. Thank you for a very interesting lecture. I hope that our government or people from our authorities, of course, in Belgrade, of course, implement Greek model. And something I want to ask you regarding increasing popularity of electrical motor scooters in Serbia. How are they regulated in Greece?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I see. You mean stand-up scooters. This is one of the issues that was pending for the last 2 years, and it was expected that will be addressed by this law, although the law simply ignored the issue. Now, what is the issue? Suddenly, a couple of years ago, these stand-up scooters became very popular, and there is no sufficient infrastructure. Contrary, for instance, to some other European cities, Athens does not have good payments, even only in the very center of the city. So it's not possible to ride on the pavements just to try a little bit. The roads are really busy. And there have been polarization of the opinion because from one side you had a lot of people buying and using them, also organized companies for tourists to use them in order to go to see the different touristic activities, and a lot of opposition to this. So there was a question, maybe 1 year ago, when the law was still anticipated, there was a proposal by the Ministry of Traffic how to resolve it. And the proposal was to divide these stand-up scooters to those that go up to 6 kilometers per hour and to consider them as pedestrians. And then the second category from 6 to 25 kilometers per hour to consider them and treat them as bicycles. But we have a problem with bicycles because we don't have bicycle lines, very little, almost no. And then the third category of up to above 25 kilometers, for which there was not even a proposal for how to be regulated. Unfortunately, the new law did not address this issue, so it is still pending. We are waiting.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I will call our colleague Miloš Kuzman to tell us something that we learned today.
Thank you for your wonderful moderating session today. It was the last time. It's still fabulous. I think in the next years you'll be like well-seen moderator in our UPES sessions. And thank you to all speakers, starting with Mr. Lopez Ibermayor, Ms. Lepotić-Kovačević, Mr. Lockhart, Mr. Green, and finally Ms. Todorović-Simeonides. And I will try now to summarize what we heard today, let's say, and to give the final notes. And if you don't mind, I will do that in Serbian, because the majority of our listeners today are from the region, so I think it will be better to speak with them on our, let's say, local languages. Poštovani slušalci webinara, pa evo danas smo počeli sa izlaganjem gospodina Vicente Lopez Ibermayora, koji nam je dao jednu vrlo lepu sliku i nadahnuti govor o tome gde se danas nalazi pravo energetike. Izdvojio bih jednu posebnu rečenicu koju je on rekao u kontekstu današnje konferencije, a to je da je veza prava i klimatskih promena nova realnost. Ja bih samo da ona nije nova realnost, da je ona realnost već bila, ali da u kontekstu pandemije koja nas je sve zahvatila, ona postaje i više nego nova realnost. Zatim je usledio govor gospođe Lepotić-Kovačević, koja je rekla da kada govorimo o ovim temama o kojima govorimo danas i o kojima ćemo govoriti sutra, mi zapravo govorimo o nama samim. I slušajući teme govornika koje su usledile, to se pokazalo kao istina, jer to zapravo jesu teme koje dotiču sve nas u našem svakodnevnom životu. Gospođa Đinđić-Ćosić je krenula tada da vodi današnji deo konferencije i lepo je rekla, a šta je plan? Kakav nam je plan sada? Imamo COVID-19, utvrdili smo određena pravila pre samo COVID-a i kako se sada nosimo sa tim u svetlu klimatskih promena, u svetlu prava energetike i njihovih međupovezanosti? Usledio je govor gospodina Bušleja koji je na jedan lepo sumaran način prikazao zapravo razvitak prava energetike u Europskoj uniji, uticaj energetske zajednice na razvitak tog prava i problematiku sa kojom se još uvek susrećemo u njenom daljem razvoju. Predstavio neke pozitivne primere, kao što je primer Severne Makedonije u usvajanju tog klimatskog plana energetskog za naredni vremenski period. Ono što bih posebno izdvojio iz njegove prezentacije je jedna kovanica koju ću danas se koristiti u budućnosti i sam često, to je Energy Law DNA, znači DNK zapravo energetskog prava. DNK energetskog prava koji je postignut sa sadašnjim nivom harmonizacije koju imamo na nivou Evropske unije i ne samo Evropske unije, nego svih zemalja zapravo koje su u Evropi, i on je tu i predstavio koje su njihove razlike, koje su njihove sličnosti. Mislim da ćemo nadgradnjama, daljim razgovorom o ovim temama zapravo učiniti taj lanac još čvršćim nego što on zaista jeste danas. I ono što je ključ njegove prezentacije bio je uvezanost energetskog, odnosno DNK energetskog prava sa zapravo Parijskim sporazumom i način na koji se taj lanac menja u svetlu klimatskih promjena, što jeste tema današnje sesije ove konferencije. Nakon toga čuli smo gospodina Lockharta koji je nam je pričao o prozumerima. Prozumerima slušamo već neko vreme, ovo nije prvi put, ali ovo je jedan izvanredan prikaz ne samo pravnog okvira, nego jedne međuzavisnosti i zapravo suštine prozumera kao takvih. Slušali smo o dobrim praksama, slušali smo o tome kako bi srpsko energetsko pravo trebalo da reaguje u kontekstu prosumera. Slušali smo o subvencijama, slušali smo o tome, čuli smo jednu lepu vest kako na Novom Zelandu ne postoji problem sa COVID-19 u smislu kako postoji u ostalom delu sveta, što meni je drago zbog njih, i drago mi je što eto i oni koji nemaju taj problem se trude da zajedno sa nama taj problem rešavaju, pričajući zajedno sa nama i diskutujući i nudeći konkretna rešenja. Samo bih rekao u kontekstu prosumera da opet pričat ću kasnije o tome što je govorila gospođa Todorović Simonides, u kontekstu subvencija. Imamo ljude koji žele da budu prosumeri u Republici Srbiji, to konkretno znam jer odatle dolazim i pretpostavljam da je ceo region takav, zakonodavstvo se izgrađuje u tom kontekstu i ja sam imao lično nekih 7-8 dana iskustva kad me jedna moja rođaka pozvala i pitala, kaže, čuo sam da se baviš energetikom, ko možeš samo da mi kažeš da se meni isplati da postavim solarni panel na kuću? Kako sad ja to da uradim? Kada sam objasnio sa kakvim se sve teškoćama u administraciji mora suočiti da bi to uradila, brzo je odustala od svog plana da bude prosumer i ostavila to za neki naredni vremenski period koji će neminovno, mislim, uslediti nakon ove pandemije i toga da, što je gospodin Lokar lepo i objasnio, nasušne potrebe za ovaj prosumerizmom u kontekstu cijele ove priče. Gospodin Green je imao prezentaciju koju kako do sada ne mogu reći da smo često viđali na prethodnim konferencijama koje je imao UPES, ali je ona bila vrlo značajna u kontekstu pandemije COVID-19. Ne možemo reći da se o ventilaciji zapravo nije pričalo. Mi imamo priče o pametnim zgradama i priče opšte o zgradama koje imaju velike ventilacione sisteme i da bi one bile puštene u rad u dobrom delu sveta, postoje pravila koje utvrđuju sve te zapravo kako bih rekao, bave se tim temama koje se tiču kvaliteta vazduha u tim zgradama i na način kako je ta ventilacija treba da bude postavljena da bi kvalitet vazduha bio bolji. Mislim da je ova pandemija samo tu temu ponovo dovela u fokus i ona se više ne tiče samo velikih ventilacionih sistema, nego se tiče i naših domova. Mi imamo problem zagađenja vazduha, konkretno ja dolazim iz Beograda, u ovom konkretnom vremenskom periodu on je nažalost realnost, osim kada duva vetar koji nam obezbeđuje koliko toliko čist vazduh, ali ova prezentacija nam je pokazala koliko je zapravo sama tema ventilacije s tehnološkog aspekta bitna za energetsko pravo i koliko je ona u kontekstu klimatskih promena, zagađenja vazduha i pandemije koja nas je zadesila nešto čime treba da se bavimo u kontekstu cijele ove priče. Elektromobilnost u Grčkoj i predavanje gospođe Todorović Simonides je nam pokazalo kako je zakonodavstvo usvojeno pre pandemije COVID-19, kakvi su izazovi. Ono što bih ja izdvojio iz ove prezentacije je to što jedna tema koja nije vezana samo za elektromobilnost, ali je u njoj vrlo značajna, to je kakvi izvori dovode do napajanja elektrovozila. Da li tradicionalni izvori energije ili obnovljivi izvori energije. I to je tema koja je, po mom mišljenju, ključna u cijeloj ovoj priči. Naravno, elektromobilnost koja postaje takođe značajna u kontekstu klimatskih promena, ali u kontekstu ove COVID pandemije, jer zapravo kada vozimo to neko električno vozilo ili smo na tom e-skuteru, mi smo zapravo opet udaljeni nekoliko metara od, govorim banalno, ali vrlo je bitno, znači od nekog narednog učesnika u saobraćaju. Pa eto i u tom kontekstu možemo to da posmatramo. Na kraju bih, i bit ću vrlo kratak, rekao šta smo mi zapravo naučili iz današnjih prezentacija i šta je zapravo ono što možemo poneti kao neki light motiv i kao nešto što bi nam mogla biti vodilja u narednom periodu u kontekstu suočavanja sa ovim temama. Naučili smo i videli smo neraskidivu povezanost između prava životne sredine i prava energetike. Videli smo da u kontekstu pandemije COVID-19 ta veza je otvorila zapravo nova poglavlja o svojoj međuzavisnosti sa kojima se mi sad danas suočavamo. Videli smo da je ta međuzavisnost u kontekstu COVID-19 zapravo nije samo potakla energetske pravnike, nego je potakla i druge učesnike u oblasti energetike da o njoj razmišljaju, da se bave temama koje su bitne u tom kontekstu. Sve ove teme kojima smo danas slušali nisu nove teme, ali one u periodu ove pandemije dobijaju dodatnom značaju i govore koliko je urgentno da te stvari rešavamo i da ih postavljamo na zdrave noge u kontekstu zakonodavstva koje treba da se ili izmeni ili da se donese novo, da bi borba protiv klimatskih promena u tom kontekstu zaživela i da bi, nažalost, koliko dođe do neke naredne pandemije, bili spremniji, bili bolje organizovani, bili fokusiraniji i bili spremni za nove izazove, na kraju krajeva. Šta to donosi? Naravno, sve ove poruke su bitne generalno. Šta to posebno govori o našem regionu? U našem regionu to posebno govori da moramo biti još obazriviji, zato što ni pre ove pandemije ovim temama se nismo u dovoljnoj meri bavili. Čuli smo šta sve srpsko u određenim prezentacijama, gde je srpsko zakonodavstvo i šta sve treba da bude urađeno. I upravo ova pandemija treba da nam da dodatni zamajac da nastavimo ili da počnemo da razvijamo svoje potencijale u ovim oblastima kako bismo došli na određen nivo koji će nam obezbediti zapravo da ta međuzavisnost između klimatskih promena i prava energetike u kontekstu budućih pandemija i generalno kada pandemija nema, bude na zadovoljavajućem nivou. Hvala puno.
Htela sam svima da se zahvalim na učešću, posebno da se zahvalim našim govornicima, da se zahvalim i centru što nas je pružio na podršku i ove godine, da se zahvalim Milošu na izuzetnim learned i zaključcima koje možemo da izvučemo iz današnje konferencije, da se zahvalim Ivi na dobrom moderiranju što nas je uputila da mislimo na sutra šta da radimo dalje. To nam pokazuje da poslušamo sutrašnju sesiju naše konferencije pod nazivom Pravo, energetike, investicije, životna sredina u kontekstu i nakon koronavirusa. Tako da hvala svim učesnicima. Budite sa nama sutra u isto vreme na istom linku. Pogledajte i naš website, LinkedIn, Instagram i sve ostalo mesta gde se pojavljujemo i nastavljamo našu saradnju bez obzira na ove okolnosti koje nam je otežavaju. Vidimo se sutra. Pozdravljam vas sve još jednom. Prijetno. Bye.